Hello, everyone. I am Sahar Safwai from Sage on Earth Consulting. I'm joining you from Vancouver, Canada, where I live and work on the beautiful indigenous territories of the Coast Salish nations. Considering what has been happening in Iran, I feel that it's important for me to acknowledge my background as an Iranian in solidarity with the people of Iran and the revolution that they are going through. It is my pleasure to prepare this presentation as part of the webinars on the role of Geological Survey Organizations in understanding risk and informing risk reduction actions. And it has been a pleasure to work with the members of the organizing committee to help them in designing these webinars, identifying the speakers and inviting them, who I am very excited to listen and learn from every one of them. In my presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of the objectives, rationale, and our approach for designing these webinars. And along the way, I'll share some concepts, mostly based on Sendai framework, but also what we've heard from GSOs through a survey that we had shared a few months ago. Geological survey organizations have been in existence in many countries for more than 100 years. Their mandate is broad and it has evolved over the years in different ways across the world. From the classic role of mapping countries' geology and assessment of the resources potentials for metals, minerals, fossil fuels, to monitoring hazards and conducting geological hazard assessments, climate and environmental change assessment, risk assessment for use in disaster risk reduction, and more recently, some of them are supporting the renewable energy programs. In many countries, GSOs are playing a role in supporting disaster and climate risk management. They are seen as a credible provider of impactful and credible scientific evidence and information on hazards and risks, which can be used on strategies, awareness and advocacy, financial risk management, building codes, and early warning systems. They have a unique position as a technical institution in the sense that they are part of the national governance mechanisms. And that means they do have access to the and can interface with decision makers. This is a benefit that many other technical institutions, such as academia or industry, may not have. The evolution of the role has happened because of the changes in demand for their services. This is mostly triggered by major disasters in the country, but also a series of elements enables them to play their role. That includes clarity on their mandate, which may be formal as a legislation, or it can be informal but well understood by partners. Governance mechanisms for partnership and collaborations, financial resources, technical expertise, and capacities. But they have always been facing challenges too, and different GSOs have taken a variety of approaches to deal with those challenges. In these webinars, we're going to hear from speakers from both sides of the aisle, from GSOs and similar technical institutions, as well as the disaster risk management entities, to hear about the progress they have made, as well as their thoughts and ideas on the challenges that they have been facing and what has enabled them to play their role. Quick reminder for everybody on some core elements of Sendai framework, which I think it's important to share as a reminder because we have used Sendai as a basis for designing this event. Understanding risk is the first priority, and that's about the fact that all the policies and practices for disaster risk management should be based on an understanding of risk and its all dimensions of vulnerability, capacity, and impact, but also for all relevant hazards. Risk governance is the second priority for action, and that is about having clarity on vision, objectives, but also roles and responsibilities, mechanisms that would allow partner entities to collaborate and coordinate, but also mechanisms for accountability and incentivizing various actors. Investing in disaster risk reduction is the third priority. Historically, but even now, majority of the funds related to disasters are dispersed, are reactive. They're dispersed once a major disaster happens and are used mostly for response and recovery. This is why many studies show the cost benefit of investing in risk reduction in peacetime, pre-disaster. These studies show that spending $1 in disaster risk reduction can save between $4 to $17. These are the numbers I have seen for different hazards and different types of measures. So investing $1 in risk reduction can save $4 to $17 in response and recovery funds. Fourth is managing residual risk, because no matter how much we do and we invest smartly in avoiding creation of new risk with new development and because of the population growth and growth of physical assets, but also invest in reducing existing risk, there will be still some residual risk, which we have to build capacities through preparedness and planning for response, recovery, and build back better. Sendai has 7 targets. 4 of them are about reducing impacts. One is on reducing disaster mortality, reduce number of affected people, reduce economic loss, and reduce damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of services. 3 of them are supposed to be increased, and that is increasing number of national and local strategies, enhancing international cooperation, and increasing availability and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and risk information. As you may have thought of it before, or you might be thinking right now, GSOs play, in a sense, indirect role by providing hazard and risk information to strategies and actions that lead to reducing the impacts. But they play a critical role pretty much in the leadership roles for targets G, which is about early warning systems, especially on the monitoring and understanding the hazards and their impacts, but also production of disaster risk information. And I think all of us are contributing right now in target F, enhancing international cooperation. So the objective of these webinars is to share knowledge, sharing insights and lessons learned in enhancing GSO's role in disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. It has been designed in 3 days, 3 parts. The first part, which is today, is about enablers, especially the governance mechanisms that facilitate the role of GSOs. Next week, we will be focusing on science and technology and advancements that GSOs have had in methods, tools, and capabilities in hazard and risk assessment. And the last day, we will be focusing on the end users, the use and application of GSO services and information that they produce in disaster risk reduction. We have developed a survey, and it was distributed through WCAG's and GEM network. The survey was long and extensive, but we end up having amazing input from 16 countries. Which is very impressive, and it shows the dedication of this institution and these specific people who took the time to respond to these extensive survey, and how much they believe in the cause of risk reduction and their role in reducing impacts of disasters in their countries. We are very grateful, as those inputs have helped us shape the event. And we hope that we will be able to share a summary of the findings with the participants. So I'm going to show you just some very quick findings, more of a teaser in a sense, from what was provided through the survey. So one of the questions was about formal or informal mechanisms for communication and collaboration between the GSOs and national entities. Not surprisingly, in the context of disaster risk management, they have the closest relationship with National Disaster Risk Management Agency. The other ministries that we have listed, you can see that there is reasonable relationship, or the 10 out of 16 countries mentioned that they do have interactions with Ministry of Environment, and you can see for Ministry of Development and Planning, Finance, and Transportation. That number is reduced. Other national entities that were mentioned by different countries are National Economic and Development Authority, Department of Industry, Science, Energy, and Resources. The name of these entities or ministries may be different, obviously, in different countries, but from the titles, you can get a sense and relate to which entities those are in your countries. Indigenous Relations, Department of Defense, Radioactive Waste Management Facility, Foreign Affairs, and Trade. Almost all of the countries have a formal mechanism for interacting. They're part of like a national committee in most of the countries that have those formal mechanisms in place. But in a lot of the countries, even though they have that formal mechanism, when it comes to communication and smaller tasks and services and quick advice, they do it informally. There were a couple of countries that did mention that even those smaller advice have to go through a very formal process. So here are a few examples of formal mechanisms. As I already mentioned, national committees is one of them, which may, and in some countries, they meet in a very organized way and have regular meetings. And there's positive feedback about those mechanisms. Legislations on mandates and roles. It's important to note that these are not exclusive. Some of the countries have more than one of these mechanisms in place. The other one is contractual arrangements. So GSO have a contractual arrangement with national entities to provide ongoing services. And financing arrangement in a sense, or funding mechanism in a sense, that the two entities work together through a common budget system that has enabled them to, or has encouraged them, incentivized them to work closely together. This one, I'll go very quick, but I think it was interesting. This is about the progress, like where GSOs are on the scale of progress in conducting hazard and risk assessment. So the first line are the number of countries that have done hazard assessment for the specific hazard for the whole country. So remember, 16 countries have responded. Actually, the list is skewed toward countries that have quite high capacity, are on the range of having higher capacity in conducting hazard and risk assessment. But also not every hazard is related to every country. What you see is 3 countries have done volcano for the whole country. 4 of them said yes to the fact that they've done tsunami hazard assessment for the whole country, 10 on landslides, 6 on earthquakes. But those numbers get reduced when the question was getting into application of hazard assessment. If the hazard assessment is used in building codes, not surprisingly, the number gets really reduced, except for the case of earthquakes, because we know for most of the other hazard measures are not incorporated into building codes in most of the countries around the world. National land use planning, guidelines and regulations, and early warning systems. The second part is about risk assessments. So the countries have done some sort of risk assessment, but either the methodology is not advanced enough, or it's in small parts and pockets of the country. But the final row is the number of countries that said yes to the fact that they've done risk assessment for the whole country for those specific hazards. So 6 out of 16 have done for earthquake, and then 8 for landslides, and 2 and 3 for tsunamis and volcanoes. Few more interesting things that were shared, some of them not surprisingly. So about challenges and barriers that GSOs are facing. Lack of consistent and sufficient financial resources, building technical capacity and capability, so the difficulties in building technical capacities and maintaining the skilled resources. Lack of mechanism for consistent data acquisition, data collection and custodianship, and data management not recognized as a critical part of science value chain. Some other interesting ones, governance challenges, such as lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities, poor understanding of science, including the uncertainty. This was mentioned by a few of the countries. That is an obstacle in interaction between DRR agencies and GSOs and the services that they are supposed to provide. Another interesting one, national DRR is based on politics, while GSOs activities are based on science, which doesn't necessarily follow the changes in political views. The lack of knowledge transfer between different political administrations. So with the changes in the political leadership, administration changes, and the knowledge that was built will be gone. And the rapid turnover of key personnel at DRR agencies. This is quite common in a lot of countries on the policy side. While these topics such as DRR is extremely complicated, it takes years for somebody without the technical background to build the understanding in order to have relationship with scientific institutions, but then they move to a different topic very soon, as soon as they build those capacities. Lag in time between when information is requested from the policy side and how long it takes to produce it. Branding of the institution was identified as another very important enabler in a sense. And one of the countries had identified that the best time, it was when the institution was playing a strong role during the disaster, like soon after the disaster. Like we cannot escape human psychology and the effect of those emotional times and crisis time. This last one is about how international collaboration can support GSOs in their role. The most popular one is something like this: training and other programs for sharing best practices and encouraging collaboration between GSOs. And another one that was interesting for me, I want to share a point, is the responses to our question about making global and regional datasets available for use in national research. This question, I have used it before when I've asked DRR entities saying, making global and regional datasets available for use in DRR at national level. And the response from DRR entities has been far less positive. And I find that fascinating. That's because DRR entities at national level, they would like to receive scientific information from their own partners at national level, because that's what they can trust. They would know, they would be able to dig in and have access to the experts to explain to them the ins and outs of it. In this case, the responders are from technical institutions. They have the skills and capacities to dig in and understand the assumptions and make modification as needed to make it that authoritative information that then the DRR partners would be able to use. And at last, I want to finish with one of my own favorite quotes. And that's the fact that there is no silver bullet solution. There is no one tool that can be used for solving a wicked problem such as DRR. Effective risk management happens when the people with intentions have access to the knowledge on risk and risk management and are supported by the governance mechanisms that enables action. DRR entities are producers of the knowledge and risk, but they need a governance mechanism that supports them in their role, and they should play their role within that governance mechanism to support others. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of